We are live to Boston Cannabis Week and MCR Labs, I believe.
Great. So
Cool.
people can share from other people.
Perfect. We going? All right. Well, welcome everybody to Cannabis Through the Ages. I just want to thank you guys so much for being here today. This is the kickoff for our Science Over Stigma campaign. And so, for those of you who might not know, Science Over Stigma is a campaign that we just launched this fall, and it involves a series of discussions aimed at challenging the misrepresentation of cannabis with science and research and data, with the ultimate goal being to create a more informed and innovative industry. But tonight, Cannabis Through the Ages, we have two lovely speakers here for you guys to kind of set the scene. So we're going to talk about, how cannabis got its stigma and how that has affected not only the industry that we work in today, but also the products that we see on shelves. But before we get started and hand things over, I just want to take some time to thank our sponsors and our partners, because we really could not have done this without you guys. Eon, Boston Cannabis Week, Seed, thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts. And I'd like to... And before we get into that good education, I would just like to give each of you kind of a couple minutes to just get up here and talk about all the good work that you do. So first, Eon, Jordan, could you please come up here for a moment?
Thank you. Thanks, Melissa. Hey, everyone. Can you hear me? I'm still yelling with the microphone in my hand. Hi, everybody. My name is Jordan. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm here tonight with Equitable Opportunities Now. Mass Eon is a nonprofit that focuses on increasing access and participation of people of color in the cannabis industry by way of policy work and programs. So whether that means that we're working alongside our elected officials, making sure that our regulations are reformed or written correctly with social justice at its core, or if we're doing programming, outreach, technical assistance, getting people access to the resources in order to get involved into the industry. And the best thing about Eon is that our network keeps growing, because everyone here has the inflatable furniture, kick back, eat some good food, hang out, learn more about Eon and our programming. We want to thank a special thanks to our friends at Seed for hosting tonight and for participating and for sharing the facilitation. Big shout out to MCR Labs for being a great partner and support, and to Boston Cannabis Week for making it all happen. Thank you all. Thanks.
Alrighty, thank you, Jordan. And now, Lisa, Boston Cannabis Week, could you please come up and say a few words?
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa Finelli, founder. I'm the Lisa Finelli Fallon. Let me start over. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Boston Cannabis Week. Boston Cannabis Week was created to provide programming and education, networking, health and wellness, art, music, fashion, cuisine. And this is the fourth year that we have Boston Cannabis Week. So thank you to MCR Labs. Thank you to Eon. Thank you to Seed for being such great partners and allowing us to be part of your education and your mission tonight. Our mission is to provide free networking and education to the community and find ways to celebrate the culture and the arts and the education of what this all is. So thank you so much for being a part of Boston Cannabis Week this year. Check out the rest of the week's events. Tomorrow we have a veteran wellness breakfast in the morning, full day of education. Thursday we have Wednesday is Fashion on Fire, Fashion and Glass Art Gallery. Thursday we have a full day of networking, virtual networking at 1 p.m. Boston Cannabis Week edition of Let's Talk Weed with our scholarship recipient Darrell Black. Then we have our networking mixer later in the day. Friday is our block party. WTF We the Females is performing, as is Green Lion Crew and Soul Rebel Project. Saturday for the Experience Boston Festival, we have Common headlining. Common with the full band, Currency with a full band, Rock Marciano and the Alchemist, Acrobatic featuring Dub Apocalypse, Dr. Bell, DJ Slipwax, and hosted by Jasmine Red. So come check out some really great music on Saturday and Sundays, our self-care Sunday brunch. Come, eat, have fun, and communicate with other members of the cannabis community. So thank you for all your support. And thank you to MCR Labs.
Alrighty, thank you guys so much. So now before I hand things over to April, the CEO and founder of Seed and our featured educator tonight, I just want to let you guys know the flow of the evening. So we're going to kick off with 2 presentations. April's going to start us off, and then we're going to hand things off to Mike Kahn, the founder and CEO of MCR Labs. After that, you guys are welcome to enjoy a museum tour and a private buying experience hosted by Seed. And then we're gonna, in between there, we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion. And then after that, you guys can feel free to ask the presenters any questions that you might have. So without further ado, April, get on up here.
It's tight back here. All right. Thank you guys so much. It is so great to be here in partnership with Boston Cannabis Week and MCR Labs and the wonderful groups you guys heard about. I am so excited about tonight because, I present a lot about things having to do with cannabis and the industry. As you know, you are currently sitting in the Core Cannabis Museum. This is a nonprofit. It's co-located with the Seed Dispensary. And I love talking about these sort of fundamental issues that the museum is all about. We really are here to try to present facts and help people understand what has happened so that we can create more reasonable drug policy going forward. So I'm just going to hit on 4 things tonight, but they're big things. So just open up your mind and buckle in. There's how did we get here? And it's going to be pretty broad because it's a short talk and I could go on forever, but I try to make it broad. The weaponization of cannabis, meaning its impact on people. The criminalization and its impact on the plant, and a little word of caution as we move forward in an industry that is now becoming highly regulated as we move away from another form of regulation. So I just want everyone to sort of go forward with open eyes. So how do we get here? So I'm sure you all have heard the story of Adam and Eve, and it's a great story, but a lot of people just think of it as a story. And I have recently come across a Gnostic text, or somebody said it was a Gnostic text. Who knows? It's a good story where, in the normal version, God says, do not eat this apple. It is bad. And then the devil snake comes in and said, you should eat that apple. And then we all get in trouble and we're racked with sin forever. There's another version of this story wherein the tree, the forbidden tree, is actually the acacia, which is pretty rocked with DMT. And God is actually Satan saying, hey, whatever you do, don't look at that tree. Don't touch that tree. And then the snake is whatever your God is and says, hey, do you really want to know the nature of all things? You should probably touch that tree. So I love this idea because I would really appreciate if going forward we could zoom out when we look at any legislation that has to do with the human relationship between us and substances. So, as I said, a few red flags as we go into this. Any law that comes between humans and substances should be scrutinized. Now, there's good reasons to put laws in place. Safety. After this talk, you're gonna hear a little bit about all of the great things that come with regulation in terms of the safety of cannabis, what's in your cannabis, what's not in your cannabis. So there's good things. And I'm not saying laws between humans and substances are bad. All I'm saying is scrutinize. There's no such thing as inherently good and evil substances, people. It's about dose. It is about use. It is about form of administration. If you hear someone say that one drug is bad or good, walk away is my best advice. Marinol has been a, Schedule 3 because it was administratively removed from Schedule 1. Why? Because a company decided that they could make money selling it. People don't like it because it's straight THC, and everybody knows you need other things besides THC unless you want to feel bugged out. Meth and Adderall are extremely close to one another. One of them we punish, the other one we give to children. Anyone who knows what that is on the bottom right knows how great it can be, and yet it remains illegal. Here is a grow. That's my mom. I just put her in everything. But this is my first grow, Curaleaf in Connecticut. It was a really interesting moment when I found myself walking a dozen cops through a 40,000 square foot cultivation facility in 2013. And I have to say, they were so excited. They were so happy that they were not having to punish people over this. So just like there's no good and evil substances, there are no good and evil occupations or roles. I think everything has to be taken for exactly what it is. Red flag, good and evil substances. The final red flag I want to talk to you about is legislation based on morality. If you see legislation that is based on morality, look twice. This is a really slippery slope. And you might wonder why I'm up here talking to you about these things. For those of you that don't know, I am an attorney. It's a lot of why I got into this. The hypocrisy is outrageous, and I just really want people to get it. And I know you do, but we have to tell everybody else. So back in the 70s, there was a wave of decriminalization that was sweeping the country. And at that moment, somebody said some cannabis was bad for kids, or a kid got a hold of it and fell asleep, something like that. And this wave of morality reversed that tide. So even though we feel like it's legal and it's all good and it couldn't possibly go backwards, it can always go backward. So just make sure we don't take this moment for granted, because it can always slip back. All right, moving on. That's my favorite part, by the way, that first part, where we really zoom out and talk about, like, this is my relationship with substance and everybody needs to step away. Anyways, weaponization. So as we know, and as you're sitting in right now, this exhibition, American Warden, is really close to all of us here at Seed. We worked really hard to try to represent what prohibition has done to real people, and also make that message accessible to everyone, not just the people who've been impacted, not just the people who know nothing about cannabis or know everything about cannabis. We wanted this to be a place of, where everyone is unified in one front, which is, let's be reasonable about drug policy. So on the wall behind you, you can see a representation of your likelihood of ending up in prison if you are a male born after 2001. If you're Black, you have a 1 in 3 chance. Latino is 1 in 6. White is 1 in 17. And American in general has a 1 in 13 chance of ending up behind bars for anything in this country. That's pretty scary. So how did we get here? It's not very difficult. It's not a great mystery. So the architect of drug policy for the first 30 years was this guy, Anslinger, this guy in the top left. And, in building this museum out, we said, how can we demonstrate in a short time period how we got here? There's a long timeline you see everywhere about all of the legislation that was passed and how we got here. But I think these 3 quotes really sum it up, and they all come from this man. Marijuana is the most violence-causing drug in the history of mankind. That's quote 1. You smoke a joint, you'll kill your brother. Quote 2. And now here's my favorite, the third. Marijuana leads to pacifism and communist brainwashing. So which is it, right? Pick a side. And the answer is the side that they need political force behind. And that's the reality. So all of this is done because we need political force. And it still happens. I mean, we're victims of it every day. We're subject to it nonstop. Whatever the political buzzword is, that's where regulation is really in danger of, constraining us as citizens. So what did that lead to, right? We have this guy, by the way, if you don't know who Anslinger is, he was, founder of what became the DEA. He was basically behind all of this vilification of jazz that you'll see in the Seed Your Soul exhibit. So, look him up. You'll be nauseous. So then it led to incarceration and enforcement, right? So the United States is the most prolific warden in the world, incarcerating 25% of the world's inmates, despite having only 5% of the world's population. Additionally, and this data is all from 2019, so things have changed, but not as much as we would like. But in 2019, police arrested over 500,000 people for cannabis-related crimes. 92% were for simple possession. Now, that is more, it's 9% more than arrests for all violent crime combined. You're paying for that. We're all paying for that. And meanwhile, I have to buy paper towels for my kid to go to school. Anyway, okay. And currently, our country houses more than 2.2 million people in prisons across the country. This is an increase of more than 500% since the 70s, and this outpaces all other countries in the world, including reported Russia and China. So finally, well, this got cut off a little bit, but it's important, so I'm just going to go back. The ACLU has found that on average, Black people are 3.6 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis. And that's just on average. It's actually higher here in Massachusetts. And in some states, like the other states, it's very, very high, like in the hundreds more likely. And of course, this is a formatting issue, but we'll not worry about that. This is really about, real lives. Like I said, we wanted to give a voice to people who have actually experienced these types of injustices. If you step into the jail cell that's here in the museum, you will hear the story of Nyambi McIntosh. Her father was legendary reggae icon Peter Tosh. He wrote the ballad for legalization, Legalize It. Her little brother, who was Peter Tosh's youngest son, was arrested for cannabis in New Jersey. They threw everything at him, especially because of who he was. He pled out. He was serving a 6-month sentence. Was attacked by another prisoner in jail, and never walked, ate, went to the bathroom, did anything by himself again. When we started building this museum, he was still alive, and he passed just before we opened it. So it's just the tragedy inherent in that story is so poetic that if I wrote it, you would think it was too contrived. But these are real stories, and Nyambi's outspoken about it because people care because it's her and they have some fame associated with their family. But these things are happening all the time, every day, and nobody cares still in this country. So criminalization, impact on the plant. You'll hear more about what the makeup of the plant looks like now when MCR talks. But what I think is really interesting is while all these things were going on with human impact, we had the impact on the plant. So across the way, you'll see an illicit cultivation exhibit. This is meant to sort of give you an idea of what grows looked like back in the day when it was illegal, and even now in criminalized states. But what's interesting about these type of grows is because the risk was so high for getting caught for cannabis, the impetus was to push up THC content as much as possible. So in the 60s, you had 6 and 7% THC, and now we're pushing 30, right? Well, we're beyond 30, I guess I should say. But and also, as you all know, then we cram down all the other trace cannabinoids that have these amazing benefits, and also just other compounds in the plant that weren't prized at the time. And now also the other impact, here's the chart for that. But the other impact is that, we've really reduced the genetic variation. And now we're in a fight to recover all of that variety that we had back then. And it has really been unfair to the plant because we've dumbed the plant down. We've managed to dumb down cannabis. It's really disappointing. I feel like my talk is like really depressing, but I'm gonna make it better, I think. The fourth thing I just want to talk to you guys about is beware trading shackles for shackles. And, we're in a position now where we're doing good things, right? We're trying to remedy, we're trying to create opportunities for people who were most impacted by the drug war and prohibition of cannabis specifically. But as I said, regulation and legislation can be weaponized no matter what it is. So the first thing I would just be careful about is, people who know are a little bit wary of federal legalization, but most people just champion for it. But there's a lot of things that could go wrong here. And at that moment of legalization, we can't just sit back. You have to sort of really scrutinize again how this goes, because we'll pay for it forever, for as long as civilization demands. But so regulation, obviously, scrutinize. Monopolies, we don't want to be in a situation where we're just a bunch of weed marts and no craft culture. The FDA could tie it up for many, many years. You know that. And then also just turning it into a pharmaceutical, which is very different from what the plant is used for by a lot of regular people. Also, social equity programs, right? So social equity programs are necessary, right? And these are just some of the characteristics, minimum ownership by an applicant, control, residency specifications, geographical specifications, income limits, positive impact plans. All these are things that we're doing to try to bring people into the industry and also make sure the industry is safeguarding the people who were most impacted. And there's great success. This is my partner, Tomas Gonzalez, with cohort 2, I believe, the social equity cohort for Boston. A lot of these people have gone on to get licenses and start businesses. We did a 3-day seminar here to help people get in the program. That was not mandated. It wasn't by regulation or legislation. It's because it was the right thing to do. So there are successes, but there's also pitfalls. So these ownership and control requirements from a business standpoint, they create capital hurdles for the applicants, and that binds them again. They don't often have the tools to execute because of the way that the program was laid out, the capital required, all of those things. The effects of incarceration. So you want a community that has dealt with the effects of incarceration either personally or within the family to suddenly be able to come out and run a very highly regulated organization and in a very difficult industry. Entities seeking to subvert the spirit of the program, administering agency resources. They're a handful of people going through these agreements to make sure that they have integrity, but they're getting racked with 300-page agreements that are written by law firms. Intent versus lip service. I mean, a $3 million licensing fee for a social equity program or financially dependent lotteries. Like, it's going to be a lottery, but you can buy as many lottery tickets as you want, right? Social equity councils, who are they? Who appoints them? And one that I have just encountered personally that I think deserves to be talked about is, the dangers to the applicant. A lot of people look at these like golden tickets, and they are borrowing money, using their own wealth, chasing these golden tickets, and it's a very difficult business, and it's a long process, and it takes a lot of money. So the whole point of this is really just to make sure that as we go through this process and as we are moving from, stigma and criminalization and prohibition into legalization, that we don't make the same mistakes, because all regulation can be wielded to oppress. So please, please scrutinize. And at the end of the day, you don't need someone to tell you how to be equitable. You don't need a mandate. You don't need regulation. You don't need government to tell you how to be equitable. Equity begins with you. When we were raising money for this business, we made sure that 81% of our investors were people of color. 82% were local to this dispensary, some living within a mile. We're 72% women owned, also excluded from the industry, and collectively have spent 10 years incarcerated by the war on drugs. So I know I could have stood up here and talked to you about how cannabis was found in tombs 1,000 years ago and then the reefer madness, but I feel like it's just played out, and I feel like it's important to talk about the moment we're in now and how we go forward. So I really appreciate your time, guys, and I'm here if y'all have questions.
Thank you so much, April. Gonna move on to Mike Kahn, the founder and CEO of MCR.
Thanks, Melissa. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Can you guys hear me okay? All right. So before I get started, just a big thank you to Eon and Boston Cannabis Week for sponsoring the event, and for Seed hosting this awesome location. This is not my first time in this particular location. I actually came here when it was the Milky Way Bar and Lounge, and that was actually met my wife here. So yeah. Anyway, my name is Michael Kahn. I am founder at MCR Labs. We are the state's first cannabis testing laboratory. We started off in 2013 when this industry was not an industry yet. All it was a collection of great activists and aspiring regulations that were about to become an industry within a few years. But at the time, there were a lot of patients who needed cannabis testing. It sounds like a really niche thing to get into, but really patients especially, those who are suffering from conditions that cannabis would help with, they needed to know the contents of their medicine. And that's what MCR Labs has been all about since 2013. Okay. I will be talking about how cannabis has changed over time, over the last decades, and especially over the last few years in Massachusetts and around the country. Sorry. Okay. So the big picture, right? Say before the advent of the regulated market, cannabis was grown outdoors or indoors or wherever without any real rules or regulations or anything. In high school, I would go down the street, I would knock on Phil's house door, I would buy a quarter or an eighth of either swag or kind bud, and that was it. One time it had pebbles in it, which was very upsetting to a high school kid. And it was either high quality or low quality, and that was it. And while it definitely was cannabis, I didn't know anything about it, right? But it's been a while since then, and we've tested hundreds of thousands of cannabis samples. And what's happened over time, and I can attest to this because I've checked, is that cannabis has gotten safer because somebody's watching, because a certain percentage of all the cannabis out there gets tested. We can tell if there's mold, we can tell if there's heavy metals, pesticides, and so forth. And that creates a virtuous cycle where it, at the very least, informs the grower, informs the producer that they have a problem. And then most of the time they want to fix it because, at the end of the day, people don't actually like poisoning each other, strangers. Cannabis has indeed gotten a lot more potent in terms of THC. People have responded, the growers have responded to what the market has been demanding. And the market has been demanding more potent THC because that's what sells, right? So whether that's more potent or not is up for debate, but there's definitely more THC in the cannabis that you could buy today than anything I could have bought back in high school, right? And there is at least an increase in the available number of products to buy, right? Clearly, it's not just swag or kind, but it's hundreds of different strains, different infused products, extracts, concentrates. The list goes on, and the industry really has boomed. Let's see. Is that right? Yeah. What some of the major things that changed with cannabis becoming more regulated is it allowed a lot of pharmaceutical scientists, chemists, people from other industries to decide to take that leap and enter this industry, something that they would have never considered before a regulated market existed. So this did bring in a lot of talent that really would have never come in, right? I'm one of those examples. I was working in pharma before I came, I saw the light and came to the cannabis industry. Pharma was terrible, but they do some things really well, right? There is sound science there, and it's actually true. We probably have better products because we've allowed more people with more experience into into our lives, really, to help make the plant somewhat better in different ways. We've also had a lot of public health officials enter the industry and tell us what is safe, what is not safe. I'm not a public health official. I'm a scientist, but I'm a different kind of scientist. And what they've done is created regulations for what they think is safe, what we should and shouldn't have in our cannabis, right? One good example is lead, right? You guys know cannabis is a bioaccumulator. It's a plant that sucks up really whatever nutrients it has access to. And whenever there's lead in the water or lead in the soil, the cannabis plant will definitely suck up that lead. And what you're going to wind up with is a flower full of lead. And lead is really toxic for mental health. And this is something that really shouldn't have in cannabis. And because the public health officials have instructed us with those regulations that each batch of cannabis flower has to have less than X amount of lead, that has over time created a cycle where anytime there's lead, all of those soils and all of those nutrient additives, anything that had lead in it, has over time gone out of business, and it's created this environment where now you have much less lead in cannabis than you used to. Honestly, the same thing goes for pesticides and mold and so many other things. It's created a virtuous cycle of much safer products, depending on what the public health officials have designed in their regulations, right? And finally, it's actually created some interesting collaborations. One example is MCR is now collaborating with a chemistry group out of Harvard University to study the safety of cartridges and lead in the cartridge hardware. We're investigating it. This is something that would have never happened had there not been a regulated and more legal market. So these are all the positive effects of having a regulated market. How do I? I'm having a technical difficulty.
Let's just resume. Where were you?
Let me just do it from this side.
We can reset it if we need to. Technical difficulties, people. Sorry.
It's just right from the beginning.
Give it a second to load itself.
Did I unplug something? I don't think I touched
I don't
anything.
think so. Might be just too many things going on. Let it load, let it load. All right.
Cool. All right. We're back, everybody. Okay. So next I want to talk about, is this stuff working? Is our new program actually making cannabis better and safer, right? How do you even begin to assess that? Like, what does that even mean, right? Is the cannabis that I'm consuming today somehow better than the cannabis I consumed, 10 or 15 or 20 years ago? this actually got brought up by accident. Back in 2018, News Channel, News Center 5 or 7 or whatever, they reached out and they said, hey, we want to do a sting on all of the local medical marijuana establishments. We want to buy some of their products and we want to test them to see if they're safe, see if they're actually doing what they said that they're doing. You know, it sounds like a great idea, right? Like let's find out. Let's test the products off the shelves and see what happens. And at first I was very much agreeable, but it occurred to me that, you know, you have to be really careful with the media and how they portray this stuff. And it occurred to me that if we found anything at all wrong with the samples that were coming off of the shelves being sold to the medical marijuana program, what would be the effect on public health? And I thought it through, and I suggested to News Center, whatever, you know, I'm in if you also test the alternatives. We have real patients who are trying to alleviate their symptoms using cannabis. They're going to see this report, and what are they going to do? They're going to think, whatever the report is, you guys are definitely not going to run something that says that everything is safe. You're here to try to find something not safe. So my response to them was, test everything, and then let the consumer decide what they think is actually safer. Because a story that's really one-sided it'll wind up having a lot of patients get scared and go and purchase cannabis from the legacy market, which may be better. I don't know, but you can't just test one side and not test all of it. They decided, no, you know, we're running a really different story. We're not interested in that. And I had to refuse, right? But I knew that they were still going to try to get a story out. They were going to find a different lab. They were going to do something. So we decided, you know, this is actually not just an important cause, but it's also interesting scientifically. And being scientists, this is just we jump to, right? And we actually went and bought a bunch of samples, both from dispensaries, you know, as patients, and from the legacy market from delivery services, and we tested them all, right? That's the kind of study that actually wound up not by accident, it wound up showing that the samples that we got from the shelves at the medical dispensaries were statistically, obviously, definitely safer than what we got from the delivery services that we chose at random. Not a huge study, but the differences were drastic, right? Half of the samples that we got from the legacy market contained a lot of pesticides, and that's just not what I want to smoke, right? There were more heavy metals and microbiological contaminants in the legacy market. That's just what we saw. I wish that current regulators would actually perform similar studies to make sure that their system is working. I got to tell you, they're not. I think they've dropped the ball on actually studying the products. But we can, and we do, see that occasionally. And we definitely have much higher fail rates. So we find more pesticides and heavy metals and microbiological contaminants in samples that are not a part of the virtuous cycle of you test it, you fail, you change your system, you test again, you see if it worked, and then you wind up selling the products. There's an incentive in place to produce safer cannabis. All right, it worked. I also want to talk about the vape crisis of 2019. It sounds like a little quaint now as a public health concern, given the last few years, but it really was a big deal. And I think it still is a big deal. It's something to really study, right? What was going on in 2019 was there were a lot of vapes that were kind of exploding. Everybody was interested in vaping products. They're easy. They're easy. They don't smell that much. It's great, right? But some enterprising folks out there decided that they could. The problem with vapes is that you need to establish the right flow in the cartridge for it to work properly, and they found a new additive to put in to the distillate to actually make them flow a little bit better. The problem is that this additive that they started putting in, it was vitamin E acetate, and it was really harmful. A lot of people went to the hospital. All over the country, people just stopped trusting cannabis in general because it just became unsafe, right? This is because some folks that really had no idea what they were doing decided to try their luck with chemistry and with, you know, with cannabis, and it turned out pretty bad. At MCR, we developed a test for this screen to screen for vitamin E acetate. We offered it for free to the community, and what we saw was that about 15% of the samples that came in for that free screen had vitamin E acetate. And that's imagine 15% of all of the vapes that you ever that you ever consume have vitamin E acetate and might send you to the hospital. To me, that's actually pretty scary. What we did find was that only that out of all of those that failed that vitamin E acetate screen, and one of them was actually over 50% of the product was vitamin E acetate. So what they were vaping was mostly extremely harmful, as opposed to mostly cannabis with a little bit of an additive. But these were all from the informal market, from the informal sources. None of these were from the regulated market, because the regulated market honestly has a little bit more to lose, and they go through a slightly more rigorous process when they produce their vapes. There's actually, for any of you who might be considering anything like this, there's actually a free government database for any products that you want to include in your vapes, or really in anything. The FDA has something called the excipient database. What an excipient is, those inactive ingredients that are generally ignored on the back of a drug packaging, but they're actually really important. If you put the wrong one in, then you might be killing people. So if anybody's making any products, check the FDA's excipient database. It's free. You can just look up whatever you're trying to put into your products to see if it's safe. Okay. Now I want to briefly talk about cannabis quality as it stands today, and where it's going in the near future. And the elephant in the room in the cannabis market today, for me, is lab shopping. Does anybody know what that is? Anybody hear of this? It's pretty it's not that widely known, but what happens today more often? That's exactly right. Shame. Yeah, and I it would be a shame not to discuss it as part of this. Like I have to talk about it. It is happening, and buyer beware, right? So the way this works isn't, any one sample that we get or that we don't get might actually be unsafe. It's more of a big data, big picture thing, right? We would get 100 samples from one grower or processor, and they would send the same 100 samples to 3 or 4 labs, and then based on the results that they see that they like the most is how they would choose their lab. So the cultivators aren't necessarily choosing their labs anymore based on the quality of the work being performed or the price or the service. It's, what are the results that I want? And what are the results that they want? Well, it's generally an economic driver, right? Unfortunately, right now, nobody buys products based on, I think this product is going to be the safest. I assume that every product that I'm buying is safe equally, right? Nobody ever buys their products based on, the most accurate label, because how can you possibly tell? You generally buy, most consumers buy their products based on, the THC label. I don't agree with it, but it's true, right? The problem is that it creates this cycle where if I own a dispensary and I'm selling great products at 25% THC, but there's another dispensary that opens down the street and starts selling them at 30% THC for the same products and the same price, I have to one up and have to compete, and it goes back and forth until we're all consuming 75% potency flower, which is clearly just who knows what is it anyway, right? And the real problem then is that the market is undermined, and people stop trusting their labels, stop trusting the regulated market, and the difference between the regulated and unregulated markets vanishes. You know, the only difference is now the price, and why would anybody choose, right? Like why bother? Unfortunately, this practice also winds up reducing quality of the products on the shelves because, well, there's no longer that virtuous cycle of you find out what's wrong, you fix it, or you find a new strain that's actually a lot more potent or has a better profile. If none of the data is real, it's really hard to improve, right? Prevents innovation, really, for the same reason. And I'm just here to say, you know, I'm standing for good science over special interest, over money, because the only people that really win that game at the end are those at the top of that pyramid, and it's not okay with me, and I'm never going to do that. I invite you guys to stand with me on that one. Thank you.
All right. I just want to thank you guys both so much, April, Mike, for your perspectives on cannabis through the ages. Now we're going to have some time for discussion, but before we do that, I just want to, acknowledge that we all have different experiences and different histories with cannabis ourselves, and so it's important to educate each other. And let's start to do that. Let's start to do that with a discussion now. So please, speak your minds, let us know your experience, and then ask any questions that April and Mike might be able to help you with. April, Mike, want to get back up here? Let you guys kind of share the podium.
Thank you.
Mostly for you, Mike. So I'm curious, aside from wanting the high THC content, what else are people looking for when they come to your lab? And what are the main problems? Is it pesticides? What are the main problems that make you mix a batch?
Great question. Did everybody hear that question, or should I repeat the question? Yeah. So the question was, what are people looking for when they come to the lab, and what specifically do we find that's harmful? Yeah, great question, and the answer is usual is it depends on who's asking, right? All sorts of people come in. We actually fought hard to allow anybody to come into the lab with any sample that they want that we would test. This is not the case in Colorado and in many other states, but we actually, they tried to sneak in a law that wouldn't allow you guys to come and use the lab, and a bunch of patients came together and we fought for that right. So that's a very different set of people than the regular sort of marijuana establishments that come in.
I mean, legal establishments. What do you find is the biggest thing that happens that
The biggest problem that we see is mold. It's just prevalent. We're in New England. It's humid. It's especially over the summer. If you dry the product too slowly or not well enough, or you're just growing in such massive amounts of biomass that you don't have the space and the equipment to dry it properly, mold turns out to be the most common contaminant. There's just a set of requirements in Mass that every batch has to pass, and one of those tests is a total yeast and mold screen, which is general molds, and we grab whatever's inside and we see what grows and we count up how much stuff grew.
So do you help to educate cultivators?
Definitely, yeah. We definitely help. Yeah, we educate cultivators to prevent that from happening. The one piece of advice I can tell you is, it's all about how you dry the product and how you cure it. And those big massive stalks are not your friend in the drying process. They retain a lot of moisture. You want to chop that away, and then the product winds up not failing as much for mold. And some strains just won't make it. You have to be okay with letting them go because they're not as resistant to the local molds as some other strains. You have to use the data that you get from the lab to inform, like, this strain always has a problem. I'm just going to get rid of it and move to a different strain that seems to fight off the molds better. I want to say that mold isn't necessarily the worst thing. We do see lead and cadmium. Those are I'm more concerned with. If I were a grower, I would actually look for those, because that I'm just more scared of that stuff. That's me.
I would just add, because I started out in cultivation as one of the early producers in Connecticut's medical market, and it was 40,000 square feet of a total nightmare because the testing requirements were the most stringent in the country, and we were using consultants back in 2013 that came from out west and never had experienced humidity. So there was just like a really, really big, you'll notice like in those early medical days, all the products were oil based because there was just no way to pass flour. But one of the things I thought was interesting is that we kept failing and we were swabbing everything and couldn't figure it out and couldn't figure it out. And ultimately we figured out, and I don't know if you've come across this or can validate it because the labs were interesting back then. But they said it was ultimately we were failing for yeast because of the skin cells. Everybody sheds skin all the time and we were failing for that. And so we had to put everybody in long sleeves and long sleeve scrubs and all that stuff. So interesting. And I don't know if you have a different take on that. That's what we were told by Myriad Labs. And it changed when we put everyone in sleeves. Yeah. Is that a real thing or did we
If it changed when you put on gloves, then it sounds real.
Yeah, it was the sleeves.
Yeah.
Or
Okay.
we just had really flaky people.
I don't know.
I don't know.
Any other questions? Come on, guys.
You have the lab here. Don't you want to?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess how is bioremediation affecting, or all remediation affecting the testing? And do you think that there should be some kind of transparency in people's processes for bioremediation, and do you see that potentially happening?
Well, I can tell you, I mean, it's a question for you, but I can tell you from my experience then and here at the dispensary, in Connecticut, we didn't have to test again. So you could do whatever you want. You could send it in, test for cannabinoids, do whatever you want to remedy it for micro, and then send it back in just to pass micro and not have to retest for cannabinoids, which, as you know, is insane because obviously whatever you did to remedy it is going to tank the cannabinoids. And so I think personally it should have to be retested for cannabinoids. And then also it should have to state that it was remediated and how. But I don't know what's happening now in the testing world.
Sure. It really depends on what you're remediating. If it's for mold or if it's for something else, there are different techniques, I guess, that people would use. Some are worse than others. Like a chemical, I don't know, like a dip in xeritol, like hydroxide, is a chemical way of killing mold. But that'll also definitely change the bouquet, at the very least. Other remediation techniques, the most common that I've seen is just dry it completely to a crisp and then rehydrate it. That drying process kills the mold, at least for a little while, and then I think that's pretty common. And if you sell it that way, okay, the mold is, I guess, it's dead. There are irradiation techniques with X-rays and stuff like that. I think more studies are needed to see whether anything else has changed with those. I could see it working. I could see potential for it, and I'm gonna keep an open mind because I can't think of anything like exactly wrong with it, just as from a scientific perspective.
Do you have to, if is that the way it works here now? Like if you send in, because we don't grow here, so if you send in, can you retest for just micro?
Yeah, if you send in, yes, you can. You can send in for a full panel of pesticides, heavy metals, microbio, and cannabinoids. And if you fail, for example, for mold, you can remediate your batch and send it back for another test, just for mold.
And then
Yeah, you're supposed to remediate the entire batch, but nobody's checking.
Isn't there? I thought I heard there was like a new machine out there for curing.
Is there a new machine for curing?
Yeah, to help out with that, curing process that is so important.
There might be. I'm not a cultivator, so I don't actually do that. But I've heard of a machine. I've heard of two things. I've heard of like an ozone machine, but it's not for curing, but it's supposed to, remediate. Yeah.
I was at the golf tournament this morning for Boston Cannabis Week. Thanks, y'all. And they were talking about this. And it's just something that it's like way to really dial in relative humidity and temperature to the point where you're not using two separate controls. So it's giving you a really accurate dew point. I think that is like talk of the town now.
Can I shout out to water activity? Anybody ever hear of water activity? No, okay, so there's moisture content, which is just like the overall amount of water in your cannabis, and that's like, I don't know, 5 to 15% is pretty normal, and it's not as good a measurement for whether your cannabis will mold up as water activity, which is just a different test that tests for the amount of free water available to molds, to to bacteria and so forth to grow. It's a really easy test. The machine costs, I don't know, like $5,000 or $8,000 or something, which for a lab as an investment is it's not, it's much less than any other machine. If I were trying to dial in my grow to have the exact amount of moisture, I would actually not measure moisture. I would measure water activity. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Hi. Oh yeah.
I can talk about the solvents. I can't really speak to people spraying Delta 8. It's a new phenomenon, but it's really outside of, we haven't seen it in the regulated market. We have not seen an increase in Massachusetts of Delta 8 in any of the products that we test. So I'm not aware of that happening. But as for solvents, everybody here know what extraction is? It's when you take the cannabis flower and you extract the active components, the trichomes, the cannabinoids, and the terpenes, hopefully, from the product, and you make a concentrated version that gets rid of the plant lipids that you don't actually want to smoke, right? Chemically, the easiest way to do that is to have introduce a solvent that dissolves the cannabinoids and terpenes, but does not dissolve what you don't want. Now, the problem is that you have to add a solvent, and some solvents are really toxic. Then you have to remove the solvent, and you might not do that, to perfection. And what you get is something that is mostly cannabinoids, maybe terpenes, but also has some solvents left over. They're called residual solvents. Classically in this industry, especially from out west, people would use hydrocarbons, light hydrocarbons. That's propane, butane. Those, the state of Massachusetts considers really unsafe. I consider them actually really safe for consumption. They are, if you check the material safety data sheet, if you check what the LD50 is, like the amount of hydrocarbons that it would take to poison you is astronomical. It's about as poisonous as carbon dioxide. If you're breathing it to the exclusion of oxygen, it's dangerous, but that's about it. But there are, because Massachusetts, and for whatever reason early on, decided that hydrocarbons were really unsafe, it actually forced a lot of processors to try to use other solvents that are in reality much less safe, but according to the regulations, you're allowed to have more residual of those solvents than of propane and butane.
Like, can you give an example?
Hexane is extremely toxic. Benzene, right? There's a huge list of solvents, and they're allowed residual, solvent amounts in parts per million on the commission's website. And unfortunately, some of them I would just say absolutely not, just ban them. Why are you even offering it? Because there are really safe alternatives. CO2 is safe. Hydrocarbons are safe if you use them in a safe manner. Please don't blow up your, they are, they are flammable, they are explosive, they're dangerous to operate, but they're not dangerous in small amounts for consumption.
I was just gonna say something, but I forgot what it was. No, but I wanted you guys to know. Oh, it's important. So I come from a long time ago, biotech, and it's important to know. I don't know if a lot of people know, but like over something crazy like 96%, and maybe of our pharmaceuticals come from botanicals. They might not be extracted, but they were once compounds found in plants. And most of the actual plant compounds that we do extract are extracted this way, like with butane and propane and those kind of alcohol. So it's not new to cannabis. It's just that it got scary because they weren't yanking out the residual solvent, and they also were blowing up their garages. So then there was lots of pushback. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I was an attorney in another life. I guess I've done a lot of things in other lives, but my answer to this is always the same, and it has to do with impairment, right? So the drug testing for cannabinoids is difficult. It lingers in your body. We all know you can't tell if somebody smoked last night or an hour ago or a month ago, but it should always be impairment. You know, if you get pulled and you are on opioids, they're not going to test you on the spot for opioids. If you're on something else, they're not going to test you on the spot. The test should always be impairment, and then it makes sense. Everyone was talking about, well, I don't want my school bus driver on smoking cannabis. I'm like, well, I would rather have them smoking cannabis than all the stuff that my school bus driver when I was growing up was on. So anyway, that's my take on it.
I totally agree. I guess I could add, for the lounges, I'm more of, try it, and there could be all sorts of like scary reasons why you might think up that they shouldn't be allowed, but I just don't buy into that. This whole industry is here despite, just opposition that was not borne out in reality. Like, you can think up a million scary reasons for why not. I say you got to try it and see what happens. I actually think there are logical reasons to have social consumption lounges. One is that there are a lot of new entrants into the market, right? There's a lot of new people that have never smoked weed before. And is it really safer for them to try their first joint like by themselves, or their first edible by themselves in their car or wherever? Like, why not have them do it in a place with experienced consumers to guide them? But that's just my opinion. I don't have any data.
Good opinion.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think if somebody has a question, or you keep looking over here, but I don't see.
Okay, so I have a second.
Yeah.
It's mainly for you. Chris, you were talking about social equity, and I'm curious, have you been paying attention to how social equity is rolling out in other states? Like, work, and what do you think about, have they actually learned from the pitfalls of other states?
So I think there's a couple buckets of states, right? There's states that want to do it well, but they are climbing a very difficult hill that is filled with quicksand, right? And so every time they try to do something, then they see the ramifications of that. And what's nice about Massachusetts, I think, is that they're trying to pivot. So when they see something going wrong, they do make change. You know, I've talked to the people, I've met with the commission many times. They've been here and presented here. Also the Boston Equity Council, I think it's called. And the people that are doing it, they really want it to work, right? So there's that bucket. And I think that they are learning from how it's going, and they want it to work. And so, good. The only thing I worry about with that group is overregulation, right? Because then we're back into what I talked about earlier, which is even if they are meaning to do well, the next group can come in and weaponize all that regulation. So just like less regulation, I think, is good for everyone. But then there's states that just don't really, in my opinion, it's just lip service. I mean, if you have, like I said, a lottery, but you can buy as many tickets as you want, is that really a lottery for social equity? Or is that like come in and spend $1 million on tickets and you're probably going to win? If you have a licensing fee that is extraordinary, and I mean like millions of dollars, millions and millions for a social equity license, I mean, I don't even know how you really stand by that. So I don't, do I have to say? I didn't say it. But yeah, so I think there's those two buckets, right? And that's exactly what I'm talking about. So under the banner of social equity, it's become a really easy way for the people who already have all the money and the connections to get everything. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. And it's frustrating. So, but I do think some states are trying and really, really want it to work out. But at the end of the day, it's like, as I said, like if we really want equity, it's in every single decision that you make when you're talking to someone or that anyone makes when they're starting a business. And just that's really how it's done. We shouldn't be legislating morality, in my opinion.
So I work with patients directly. I have a lot of patients that, like you mentioned, sometimes brands can lose their credibility. So I have a lot of patients that don't really trust products from dispensaries, but they want their medical card so they can grow their own and feel safe with their own products. With that, it's hard to teach them about cannabinoids and terpenes when they don't even know exactly what they're getting from their own plants.
Yeah.
So do you test for patients that grow or no?
Yep, we do test for patients that grow. Anybody can come in, no appointment necessary. You just come in, or you can contact us on our website. Email us if you have a hardship, economic hardship. We definitely have worked with many patients to provide discounted or even free services, especially with special circumstances. We do it all the time. It's kind of why we're here.
Tell them the procedure? Like, do they
Yeah.
have to drop it off? Do they have to
Yep.
fill? What are they?
Sure. We have right on our website at mcrlabs.com, we have a list of the tests that we can provide and the amounts that you need to bring in. All you have to do is show up with those amounts, and the price sheet is there. Everything is open and available.
What's the standard for like a full run of what's?
I would never
I mean,
recommend a full run for just a patient that's growing by themselves, because I mean, why would they test for pesticides? They're growing their own. They know if they're putting pesticides. And I would have this conversation with a patient. What are your actual concerns? Are you concerned about mold, or is that just not an issue because you're smoking it? What are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to look for specific cannabinoid profiles or terpene profiles? Or are you just interested in growing because you like it? Because in that case, you really don't need testing, and it's okay. You don't have to know exactly what's in your cannabis if you grow your own and you like it. So to me, it's a discussion. If they have a specific reason that they want to find out what's in their cannabis, we're going to work with them and we're going to make sure that they get that data. But half the time we actually wind up talking them out of testing because it just doesn't necessarily benefit them in their situation.
How much does it cost? Like if I have a drink and I want to know how much THC is in this,
Cannabinoid profile is typically $50.
$58.
$50.
$50?
Mhm.
$50.
Nothing is
50.
What about if like a lot of times the stuff you're most concerned about is the heavy metals and things like that, right?
It depends, right? What I'm most concerned about, like pesticides to me are worse than heavy metals,
Right,
but they're not.
If you're growing your own.
Yeah, then I would be most concerned. Probably I would get one test out of all of my, like if I'm just routinely growing at home, I would do one test for heavy metals at some point. It'll be sort of a catch-all for my water, for my nutrient lines, for my soils. If that's okay, I'm going to say I'm pretty safe, and maybe come back once in a while with that test if I'm actually really concerned. Because we've seen weird situations like the city changed out pipes and now there's just a ton of lead in the pipe. That has happened once in Massachusetts. Or a nutrient line gets broken somehow. Like it's something that you can check on once in a long while, but I wouldn't recommend it for every single strain. If you're going for a specific cannabinoid profile because you have a condition that you're trying to treat, and you're growing a bunch of mother plants from different seeds and you're trying to figure out what you're going to propagate, then you probably want to have more testing and really dial in your profile. That, then it becomes a sort of an expedition for a lot of data. But really, it really depends on the patient and their needs. We actually, I want to plug a part of our website actually has a cannabis review where we've collected at one point like hundreds and hundreds of peer-reviewed publications for different conditions that are said to be treated by different cannabinoids. And it's free. It's just on the website. It's free for anybody, where you can say, I have, I don't know, insomnia, and which cannabinoids have ever been shown to be effective for insomnia. And you would just have that list, and you could just read those peer-reviewed publications right through our website.
What's the website?
mcrlabs.com. It's called the Cannabis Review. It's a little outdated. It's been a couple of years, but it's still a great resource.
All right. You guys know a lot. You're all set. All right. Thank you guys so much. Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you both again. Really appreciate all of the education tonight. The event is not over though, so if anybody is interested in a museum tour, you can head over to the entrance over there, and Tomas will be happy to give you a tour of this beautiful facility. We also have some great food over in the corner. We have some vendor tables. Please go say hello to them. And then anybody interested in buying products, Seed is going to be open for the attendees of this event for at least the next hour, so be sure to check them out as well. And last, but certainly not least, anybody interested in getting more involved with Science Over Stigma. As I said, we have a whole month-long, a whole fall of events lined up. So if you guys are interested in getting more involved, want to just learn more about what those discussions will be, you can head over to the MCR table, and we'd be happy to talk you through it and get you more involved. Thank you guys so much for being here. Really appreciate you.